You're not leaving, are you?
I have to. I have to do this for us.
The ultrasound gel was cold against my skin, sending a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. I lay on the examination table in the small clinic room, my eyes fixed on the ceiling tiles, counting the tiny imperfections in the acoustic panels above me as Dr. Morrison moved the transducer across my swollen belly. 23 weeks pregnant, and every appointment felt like walking a tightrope between relief and terror. "Everything looks perfect, Sloane. Doctor," Morrison said, her voice warm and reassuring as she studied the grainy black-and-white image on the monitor beside me. "Your little one is measuring right on track. Strong heartbeat, good movement. Would you like to know the sex?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. 6 months ago, I'd fled Boston in the middle of the night with nothing but a hastily packed duffel bag and the knowledge that I was carrying the child of a man I could never see again. 6 months of looking over my shoulder, of changing my phone number, of taking a new position at this small community clinic in Providence under my mother's maiden name. 6 months of telling myself I'd made the right choice, even as guilt gnawed at me every single day. "It's a boy," Dr. Morrison announced with a smile, and something cracked open inside my chest. A boy. Caspian's son. The baby kicked as if in response to my thoughts, a flutter of movement that still amazed me every time I felt it. "A boy," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. My hand moved instinctively to cradle my belly, that protective gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Would he have his father's dark hair? Those penetrating gray eyes that could see straight through any lie? The sharp intelligence that made Caspian Reed one of the most dangerous men in New England? "I'll print out some pictures for you, Doctor," Morrison said, patting my arm before turning to adjust the ultrasound machine. "You can get dressed, and I'll have them ready at the front desk." I nodded my thanks, waiting until she'd left the room before sitting up slowly. My scrubs felt too tight these days. The elastic waistband rolled down beneath my bump. I worked part-time now, just enough shifts to pay rent on my tiny studio apartment and keep food in my fridge. The nursing board had been surprisingly easy to navigate when I'd requested a transfer of my license to Rhode Island. Just another Sloane Carter starting fresh in a new city, no connection to Sloane Hartley, who'd disappeared from Boston General Hospital without notice. As I wiped the gel from my stomach and pulled my shirt down, I allowed myself a moment of weakness. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the hidden folder where I kept the only photo I had of Caspian and me together. It had been taken at a charity gala 6 months before everything fell apart, before I knew what he really was. In the photo, his arm was wrapped around my waist, pulling me close against his side. His expression was relaxed in a way I rarely saw, a genuine smile on his face as he looked down at me. I was gazing up at him with such obvious adoration that it hurt to look at now. I'd been so naive, so stupidly, blindly in love with a man I didn't really know at all. The memory of how we'd met still played in my mind with crystalline clarity. It had been a late night in the ER, nearly 2 a.m, when they'd brought him in. Gunshot wound to the shoulder, his expensive suit soaked with blood. He'd walked in under his own power, flanked by 2 men in equally expensive suits who'd refused to leave his side. I'd been the triage nurse on duty, and when I'd looked into those cold gray eyes, something had sparked between us that I still couldn't fully explain. "Just a graze," he'd said, his voice deep and controlled despite the obvious pain. "I apologize for the late-night visit, but I prefer discretion with these matters." I should have called the police. It was protocol for any gunshot wound. But something about him, about the quiet authority in his voice, and the way his men deferred to him without question, told me that involving the police would only create problems. So I'd treated him myself in a private examination room, my hand steady as I cleaned and stitched the wound while he watched me with those intense eyes. "You're very calm," he'd observed. "Most people would be shaking." "I'm a trauma nurse," I'd replied, focusing on my work. "I've seen worse." "I'm sure you have." There was a note of approval in his voice that sent an unexpected thrill through me. "What's your name?" "Sloane." I'd looked up then, meeting his gaze. "And you are?" "Caspian Reed." He'd said it like I should know the name, and later I'd discover that I should have. But in that moment, I'd simply nodded and gone back to stitching his shoulder, unaware that I was sealing my fate along with his wound. He'd come back the following week to have the stitches removed, though I suspected he had people who could have done it for him. Instead, he'd requested me specifically, waiting patiently in the ER until my shift ended at midnight. Then he'd asked me to dinner, and despite every rational instinct telling me to decline, I'd said yes. The courtship that followed had been intense, intoxicating, and completely overwhelming. Caspian pursued me with the same focused determination he applied to everything in his life. Expensive dinners at restaurants where the maitre d' knew his name and preferences. Weekend trips to his beach house in Newport. Flowers delivered to the hospital so often that my coworkers teased me mercilessly. He was charming, attentive, and utterly devoted in a way that made me feel like the center of his universe. It was 3 months before I understood what he really was. I'd been at his penthouse apartment in Boston's Seaport District, wearing nothing but his shirt, and reading a book in his study while he took a phone call in the next room. I hadn't meant to overhear, but his voice had carried through the partially open door, cold and flat in a way I'd never heard before. "I don't care what excuses he has. The shipment was light by 20 kilos, and someone's going to answer for it. Make an example of Rodriguez, public enough to send a message, but clean enough that it doesn't draw unnecessary attention." I'd frozen, my book forgotten, as the true nature of Caspian's import-export business crystallized with horrifying clarity. The late-night phone calls, the armed guards who were always nearby, the way other men looked at him with a mixture of fear and respect, the expensive lifestyle that seemed excessive even for a successful businessman. Caspian Reed wasn't just wealthy. He was dangerous. He controlled the flow of drugs, weapons, and money through most of New England, operating in the shadows while maintaining a legitimate business facade, and I'd fallen in love with him without ever seeing the truth hiding in plain sight. When he'd returned to the study, he'd found me standing by the window, my arms wrapped around myself like I could hold the pieces of my world together through sheer force of will. "You heard?" he'd said. Not a question. "What are you?" I'd whispered, unable to look at him. He'd been quiet for a long moment before answering. "I'm exactly who I've always been, Sloane. You just finally understand what that means." "You kill people." My voice had cracked on the words. "You hurt people. You destroy lives." "I protect what's mine." His voice had hardened. "I provide order in a world of chaos. The drugs would flow with or without me. The weapons would be sold. The money would change hands. I simply ensure it happens in a controlled manner that benefits my people and keeps the streets safer than they would be otherwise." That's a rationalization. I'd finally turned to face him, seeing him clearly for the first time. "You're a criminal, Caspian. Everything you've built is founded on violence and fear." His jaw had tightened, but his voice remained controlled. "And yet you've benefited from that foundation. The safety I provide, the life I've given you, the protection that surrounds you whether you realize it or not. You don't get to enjoy the fruits while condemning the tree." He'd been right, and that was what had made it so much worse. I had enjoyed it all, had luxuriated in his attention and the lifestyle he provided, without asking too many questions. I'd been willfully blind because the alternative was admitting that I'd fallen in love with a monster. I'd left that night, returned to my own apartment, and spent the next week avoiding his calls and messages. But Caspian wasn't a man accustomed to being ignored. He'd shown up at the hospital, at my apartment, at my favorite coffee shop, always with that same intense focus that had drawn me to him in the first place. "I can't change what I am," he'd told me during one of our increasingly fraught conversations. "But I can promise you that you'll always be safe with me. I would never let anything touch you, Sloane, You're precious to me in a way nothing else has ever been. And like a fool, I'd believed him. I'd convinced myself that love could exist separate from his business, that I could have a relationship with Caspian Reed, the man without being contaminated by what Caspian Reed the crime lord did to maintain his empire. We'd reconciled, and for a brief, shining moment, I'd actually believed we could make it work. Then I'd discovered I was pregnant. The realization had hit me 3 days before I fled Boston. I'd been feeling off for weeks, tired and nauseous in the mornings, but I'd attributed it to stress. When my period was 2 weeks late, I'd finally taken a test in the hospital bathroom between shifts. The 2 pink lines had appeared almost instantly, and I'd stood there in that sterile bathroom stall, staring at them, while my entire world restructured itself around this new reality. I was carrying Caspian Reed's child. The thought had terrified me in a way nothing else ever had. What kind of life could I give this baby with Caspian as its father? Would my son grow up surrounded by violence and criminality, learning to see it as normal? Would he be in danger from Caspian's enemies, a target because of who his father was? Would he follow in Caspian's footsteps, perpetuating the cycle of violence and fear? I couldn't let that happen. I wouldn't. So I'd made my choice. I'd emptied my small savings account, packed everything I could fit in 2 duffel bags, and left Boston in the middle of the night while Caspian was out of town on business. I'd left my phone behind, bought a prepaid cell with cash, and applied for nursing positions in Rhode Island under my mother's maiden name. Within a week, I'd landed a part-time position at this small community clinic in Providence, found a cheap studio apartment, and started building a new life. A life where my son could grow up safe and normal, never knowing what his father was. Now, standing in this examination room with ultrasound pictures of my baby boy waiting for me at the front desk, I allowed myself a moment to grieve for what could never be. Caspian would have been a devoted father in his own way. He would have protected our son fiercely, provided for him without limit, taught him strength and loyalty and all the complicated values that made up his personal code. But he would have also exposed him to a world of danger and moral compromise that I couldn't accept. My son deserved better. He deserved a chance at normalcy. I pulled myself together, wiped away the tears that had escaped without permission, and opened the examination room door. The clinic's hallway was quiet at this time of afternoon, most of the scheduled appointments completed, the staff preparing for the evening shift. I could hear Dr. Morrison talking to someone at the front desk, her professional tone slightly elevated in that way that suggested she was dealing with an unexpected situation. Something about her voice made my steps slow. There was a tension there that shouldn't exist in this sleepy clinic, where the most dramatic thing that usually happened was someone coming in with a sprained ankle or seasonal allergies. I turned the corner into the reception area and stopped dead. He was there. Caspian Reed stood in the middle of the small waiting room, looking utterly out of place in his tailored charcoal suit and Italian leather shoes. His dark hair was shorter than I remembered, styled back from his face in a way that emphasized the sharp angles of his features. 2 men flanked him, one on either side, their hands clasped in front of them in that telltale stance of professional security. And his eyes, those penetrating gray eyes that still haunted my dreams, were fixed directly on me with an intensity that made my breath catch in my throat. For a moment, neither of us moved. The world seemed to contract to just this space, this moment, this impossible collision of the past I'd fled and the present I'd carefully constructed. I watched recognition, shock, and then something darker flicker across his face as his gaze dropped to my swollen belly, now impossible to hide in my fitted scrub top. Understanding dawned in those gray eyes, sharp and immediate. His expression went completely blank, that controlled mask he wore when processing information that threatened to overwhelm him. But I could see the tension in his jaw, the white-knuckled grip of his hands at his sides, the barely controlled fury and hurt and confusion radiating from him in waves. Sloane. He said my name like a prayer and a curse combined. Why didn't you tell me? The clinic waiting room suddenly felt impossibly small, the walls closing in as Caspian took a step toward me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet remained rooted to the worn linoleum floor. Dr. Morrison looked between us with growing concern, her hand hovering near the phone on her desk as if debating whether to call security. The gesture would have been laughable if the situation weren't so terrifying. What could clinic security possibly do against Caspian Reed? "Mr. Reed," I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is unexpected." His eyes never left my face, but I saw the muscle in his jaw twitch at my use of his formal name. "Is it? I've been looking for you for 6 months, Sloane. 6 months of wondering if you were dead in a ditch somewhere, if someone had taken you, if I'd somehow driven you away." His voice was controlled, almost conversational, but I could hear the barely leashed rage beneath the surface. "And here you are, in Providence, pregnant with what I can only assume is my child, based on the timing." I wrapped my arms protectively around my belly, a gesture that didn't escape his notice. His expression flickered, something raw and wounded crossing his features, before the mask slammed back into place. "I don't think this is the appropriate place for this conversation," I said quietly, acutely aware of Dr. Morrison listening to every word, of the receptionist who had gone completely still behind her desk, of Caspian's men standing like statues by the door. "Then where would be appropriate?" Caspian asked, his tone deceptively mild. "Your apartment? The one you're renting under a false name at 247 Waterman Street, Unit 3B? Or perhaps we could discuss it at the diner where you've been picking up occasional shifts on weekends, working under the table for cash, because you don't want to leave too much of a paper trail?" Ice flooded my veins. He knew where I lived, where I worked. He'd known, possibly for weeks, and had been watching me, waiting for... what? The right moment to confront me? Evidence of what I'd been hiding? "You've been following me," I whispered, my hand instinctively moving to my belly again. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "I have people who keep track of things that matter to me. Did you really think you could disappear, Sloane? That I wouldn't move heaven and earth to find you?" He took another step closer, and I fought the urge to back away. "What I can't understand is why. Why run? Why hide? Why keep my child from me?" "Because of what you are," I shot back, anger temporarily overriding fear. "Because I won't raise my son in your world. Your son." The words came out flat, emotionless, but I saw his hands clench into fists at his sides. "My son, Sloane. Mine. And you made the decision to cut me out of his life without even giving me a choice. What choice could there be?" My voice rose despite my efforts to remain calm. "Either I stay and raise him surrounded by violence and criminality, or I leave and give him a chance at a normal life. That's not a choice, Caspian. It's survival." Dr. Morrison cleared her throat nervously. "Perhaps I should give you two some privacy. Sloane, I'll just leave your ultrasound pictures at the desk." "I'd like to see them," Caspian interrupted, his eyes still locked on mine. "The pictures of my son." The possessiveness in his voice sent a shiver down my spine. This was the man who controlled an empire through force of will and strategic violence, who made people disappear when they crossed him, who had built everything he had on a foundation of fear and blood. And now he was claiming my baby with that same absolute certainty. "They're Sloane's medical records," Dr. Morrison said carefully, clearly trying to navigate the sudden minefield her quiet clinic had become. "I can't release them without her permission." Caspian's gaze finally left me to settle on Dr. Morrison, and I watched her physically recoil from the intensity of it. "I'm not asking for permission," he said softly. "I'm telling you that I will see pictures of my child. Now we can do this the easy way, with Sloane's cooperation, or I can have my attorney contact the hospital's legal department and make this an official matter. Your choice. It's fine, I said quickly, not wanting to drag Dr. Morrison into this mess any further. Give him the pictures. Dr. Morrison hesitated, then nodded and retrieved the small stack of ultrasound printouts from the folder on her desk. Caspian crossed to her in 2 long strides and took them, his movements controlled but urgent. I watched as he studied the images, his expression unreadable as he traced the outline of our son's profile with 1 finger. 23 weeks? He asked, his voice rough. Yes, I confirmed quietly. You've known for... what? 4 months? 5? He looked up at me, and the hurt in his eyes was almost more than I could bear. You've been carrying my son all this time, going to appointments alone, dealing with everything alone, and you never once thought to tell me. I thought about it every single day, I admitted, my own eyes burning with unshed tears. But every time I reached for the phone, I remembered what you are, what you do, the people you've hurt, the lives you've destroyed. And I knew I couldn't let my son grow up thinking that was normal. Our son, Caspian corrected, his voice hardening. He's our son, Sloane. Half of him is me, whether you like it or not. You don't get to erase me from his existence just because you disapprove of my choices. Your choices have consequences, I said. Children who grow up in your world end up damaged or dead. I won't let that happen to him. Caspian was quiet for a long moment, studying the ultrasound pictures with an expression I couldn't read. When he finally spoke, his voice was deadly calm. We're going to continue this conversation somewhere private. You're going to come with me now. No. The word came out stronger than I felt. I'm not going anywhere with you. His eyes snapped to mine, gray and cold as winter steel. That wasn't a request, Sloane. And I'm not one of your employees to be ordered around, I shot back. I'm a free woman making my own choices, and I choose not to go anywhere with you. Something almost like admiration flickered across his face, quickly replaced by determination. You misunderstand the situation. I'm not asking for your cooperation because I need it. I'm asking because I'd prefer not to forcibly escort a pregnant woman out of a medical clinic. But make no mistake, Sloane. You are coming with me. We can do this quietly and with dignity, or we can make a scene. Your choice. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew Caspian well enough to recognize that he meant every word. He would physically carry me out of here if necessary. Consequences be damned. The 2 men by the door shifted slightly, ready to follow whatever orders he gave. This is kidnapping, I said, my voice shaking slightly. This is protecting what's mine, he corrected. You and that baby are mine, Sloane. You were mine 6 months ago, and you're still mine now. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for everyone. Dr. Morrison made a small sound of protest, reaching for the phone. But one of Caspian's men was there in an instant, his hand covering hers on the receiver. Not threatening, exactly, but the message was clear. Please don't make this difficult, Caspian said to her, his tone almost gentle. I have no quarrel with you, Doctor. This is between me and the mother of my child. Once we leave, you'll never see me again. I give you my word. Sloane? Dr. Morrison looked at me, clearly torn between her duty to protect her patient and the very real threat standing in her waiting room. Do you want me to call the police? I thought about it, really considered it for a moment. But what would the police do? Caspian owned half the force in Boston, and I had no reason to believe his reach didn't extend into Providence as well. Even if they arrested him, he'd be out within hours. And then I'd have made an enemy of the most dangerous man in New England while pregnant with his child. It's fine, I said quietly, the taste of defeat bitter on my tongue. I'll go with him. Relief flashed across Caspian's face, quickly masked. A wise choice. Gentlemen, the car. One of his men spoke quietly into a phone, while the other held the clinic door open. Caspian approached me slowly, as if I were a skittish animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. When he was close enough to touch, he held out his hand. Come, Sloane. We have a great deal to discuss. I ignored his offered hand and walked past him toward the door, my chin held high despite the fear coursing through me. I heard him follow, felt his presence at my back like a physical weight. As we stepped out into the late afternoon sunshine, I saw a sleek black Mercedes idling at the curb, its windows tinted dark enough to hide whatever happened inside. Where are we going? I asked as one of the men opened the rear door. Somewhere private, Caspian replied. Somewhere we can talk without interruption. The drive took less than 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. Caspian sat beside me in the back seat, close enough that I could smell his cologne. That familiar scent of cedar and bergamot that used to make my heart race for entirely different reasons. He didn't touch me, didn't speak, just studied me with those intense gray eyes, as if trying to memorize every detail of how I'd changed over the past 6 months. I kept my gaze fixed out the window, watching Providence slide past, trying to memorize the route in case I needed to find my way back. We drove through downtown, past the financial district, and into a residential area of elegant brownstones and tree-lined streets. The car finally pulled up in front of a beautiful brick building that had been converted into luxury apartments. You own property here, I said. It wasn't a question. I own property everywhere, Caspian replied. This particular building is useful for meetings that require discretion. Come. The apartment he led me to was on the top floor, a spacious unit with hardwood floors, exposed brick walls, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Providence River. It was decorated with the same understated elegance that characterized all of Caspian's properties. Expensive but not ostentatious, comfortable but clearly designed to impress. His men took up positions outside the apartment door as Caspian gestured me toward a leather sofa in the living room. I remained standing, not wanting to give up any advantage, however small. Sit, he said, moving to a bar cart and pouring himself 2 fingers of whiskey. Please. The please was an afterthought, but I appreciated the effort. My feet were aching from my shift earlier, and the baby was pressing on my bladder in that uncomfortable way that had become increasingly common. I lowered myself onto the sofa, keeping my posture straight and my expression neutral. Caspian settled into a chair across from me, the ultrasound pictures spread on the coffee table between us. He took a long drink of his whiskey, then set the glass down carefully, his movements controlled and precise. Tell me everything, he said. From the beginning. Why you left, what you've been doing, how you're feeling. All of it. I studied him for a moment, trying to gauge his mood. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface. But there was something else, too. Hurt. Real, genuine hurt that he was trying to hide behind his usual mask of control. I found out I was pregnant 3 days before I left, I began, my hands folded protectively over my belly. I took the test at the hospital between shifts. When I saw those 2 lines, I panicked. All I could think about was what kind of life our child would have with you as a father. His jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. I couldn't stop imagining him growing up surrounded by violence, seeing people fear you, learning that power comes from intimidation and force. Maybe even being hurt by your enemies because of who his father is. My voice cracked slightly. I couldn't do that to him, Caspian. I couldn't knowingly bring a child into your world. So you ran, he said flatly, without a word, without giving me any chance to make things right. What could you have done? I asked. Changed who you are? Walked away from your empire? We both know that's not possible. You are what you are, and I am what I am, and those 2 things are fundamentally incompatible. Caspian leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes boring into mine. You're right that I can't change the past. The things I've done, the choices I've made, they're permanent. But you're wrong about the future. Wrong about what I'm capable of for the people I love. Love isn't enough, I whispered. Not when it's built on a foundation of violence and fear. Then what is enough? His voice rose slightly, frustration breaking through his control. What would I have to do, Sloane? What would be sufficient for you to trust me with our son? I don't know, I admitted. That's the problem. I don't know if there's anything you could do that would make me feel safe bringing him into your life. He stood abruptly, pacing to the windows, his hands clasped behind his back. I watched the tension in his shoulders, the rigid set of his spine. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. I need you to understand something. From the moment I met you, you became the most important thing in my world. More important than my business, my reputation, my power. Everything I've built means nothing if I don't have you. He turned to face me. When you disappeared, I thought I'd lost you forever. Do you have any idea what that did to me? The months I spent searching, the resources I devoted to finding you, the fear that kept me awake every night? Then you should understand why I ran, I said softly. That intensity, that possessiveness, it's frightening, Caspian. You don't love me like a normal person. You love me like you own me. His expression hardened. Because I do own you, Sloane. Maybe not legally, maybe not in any way that matters to society, but you're mine. You were mine from the moment you stitched up my shoulder in that emergency room. And that baby you're carrying, he's mine too. Nothing you do, nowhere you run, will ever change that. The certainty in his voice sent ice through my veins. This was the Caspian Reed that others feared. The man who took what he wanted and destroyed anyone who stood in his way. For 6 months, I'd managed to forget this side of him. To remember only the tender moments, the gentle touches, the man who'd made me feel cherished and safe. But that man and this man were one and the same, and I'd been a fool to think otherwise. What are you going to do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Keep me here? Force me to come back to Boston? He was quiet for a long moment, studying me with those penetrating eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was calmer, more measured. I'm going to give you a choice, Sloane. A real choice, not the impossible situation you think you face. He moved back to his chair and sat, leaning forward intently. You can return to Boston with me. Live in a property separate from my main residence if you prefer. Continue your nursing career or not, as you choose. I'll provide everything you and the baby need, including security to ensure you're both safe from anyone who might see you as a vulnerability. That's not a choice, I protested. That's captivity with better amenities. I'm not finished, he said sharply. The alternative is that you stay here in Providence. Continue your life as you've been living it, but with conditions. I waited, knowing this was where the trap would close. First, I will know where you are at all times. Security will be present, though they can be discreet. Second, I will be involved in this pregnancy and in our son's life from this moment forward. Doctor's appointments, decisions about his care, his birth, everything. Third, you will not disappear again. If you try to run, I will find you. And next time, there won't be a conversation. You'll come back to Boston whether you want to or not. The conditions were harsh, but they were also more lenient than I'd expected. I'd anticipated demands that I return to Boston immediately, that I give up any pretense of independence. This, at least, allowed me to maintain some semblance of my current life. And if I refuse both options? I asked, already knowing the answer. Caspian's expression went cold. Then I'll take the choice out of your hands entirely. I have a team of lawyers who can have you declared an unfit mother based on your disappearance and deception. I can have you committed for psychological evaluation based on the erratic behavior of fleeing in the night while pregnant. I can make your life so difficult that you'll beg me to take over. Don't test me on this, Sloane. I'm trying to be reasonable, but my patience has limits. There it was, the threat beneath the velvet glove. He would destroy me if I didn't comply, would use his power and resources to strip away everything I'd built and force me to submit to his will. That's not reasonable, I said, my voice shaking with anger and fear. That's coercion. That's reality, he corrected. I'm giving you the best offer you're going to get. Take it or leave it. But decide now. I looked down at my belly, at the swell of life beneath my hands. 23 weeks. In less than 4 months, my son would be born. He would need stability, security, and safety. Could I provide those things on my own, constantly looking over my shoulder, always afraid that Caspian would change his mind and take more aggressive action? Or was it better to accept his terms, maintain what independence I could, and hope that over time I could find a way to protect my son from the darker aspects of his father's world? I'll stay in Providence, I said finally. Under your conditions, but I want some of my own. Interest flickered in his eyes. Go on. I want your word that you'll never involve our son in your business. No meetings at the house, no discussions where he might overhear, no exposure to that side of your life whatsoever. Agreed, Caspian said without hesitation. I want to choose his pediatrician, his schools, the people who are around him. You can have input, but final decisions about his care are mine. He considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. As long as the choices are reasonable and don't compromise his safety. And I want you to promise that if something happens to you, if your enemies come for you, there's a plan in place to keep us safe. I won't let our son pay for your sins. Something dark and painful crossed Caspian's face. There are already contingencies in place. Trust accounts, safe houses, people who owe me favors that will ensure you're both protected if I'm no longer here. You and the baby will never want for anything, Sloane. Not while I'm alive, and not after I'm gone. The casual way he referenced his own potential death sent a chill through me. This was the reality of his world, where violence was always one step away, where tomorrow was never guaranteed. Then we have an agreement, I said quietly. Caspian stood and crossed to me, kneeling beside the sofa so that we were at eye level. This close, I could see the faint lines of strain around his eyes, the evidence of sleepless nights and stress. My disappearance had taken a toll on him, I realized. Whatever else he was, his feelings for me were genuine. I know you don't trust me, he said softly. I know you see me as a monster. But I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove that I can be more than that for our son. For you. Let me show you that love can exist even in darkness, that family can be built on something stronger than fear. His hand moved tentatively toward my belly, hovering just above the curve without making contact. May I? I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. His palm settled gently over my bump, his expression transforming into something almost reverent as he felt our son move beneath his touch. My son, he whispered. I promise you, little one. I'll keep you and your mother safe, whatever it takes. It was a promise I desperately wanted to believe, even as every rational part of my brain screamed that I was making a terrible mistake. But as I watched Caspian's face soften with wonder at his first touch of our child, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, he was capable of being the father our son deserved. The next 3 weeks passed in a strange limbo of adjustment and tension. True to his word, Caspian provided security that was present but discreet. I never saw the same face twice, but I always felt watched. Men in nondescript cars parked on my street. A woman who seemed to frequent the same coffee shop I did each morning. A maintenance worker who appeared to spend an unusual amount of time repairing things in my apartment building. Caspian himself became a constant presence in my life. He attended every doctor's appointment, sitting beside me with that same look of wonder on his face as we watched our son move on the ultrasound screen. He had questions for Dr. Morrison about everything: the baby's development, potential complications, what I should or shouldn't be eating. The doctor handled his intensity with professional grace, though I caught her giving me concerned looks when he wasn't watching. He took me shopping for baby supplies, insisting on the best of everything despite my protests. The nursery in my small apartment slowly filled with an expensive crib, a glider chair that cost more than my monthly rent, and enough tiny clothes to outfit triplets. When I objected to the excess, he simply looked at me with those gray eyes and said, "My son deserves the best. Get used to it." But it was the evenings that were the most complicated. Caspian would appear at my door around 7, carrying dinner from whatever upscale restaurant he'd decided we should eat from that night. We'd sit at my small kitchen table, the contrast between the elegant food and my modest surroundings almost comical, and talk about safe topics. The baby's name. Whether we needed to install a security system. What color to paint the nursery walls. We never talked about the past. Never discussed the night I'd fled or the reasons behind it. Never acknowledged the fundamental incompatibility that had driven us apart in the first place. It was as if we'd silently agreed to pretend those 6 months of separation had never happened, to build something new on a foundation of willful ignorance. But the past had a way of refusing to stay buried. It was a Tuesday evening, 26 weeks into my pregnancy, when everything shifted. Caspian had arrived with Thai food and an unusually subdued expression. I'd learned to read his moods over the past weeks, the subtle signs that indicated when his business was causing stress. Tonight, something was different. Worse. "There's something I need to tell you," he said after we'd finished eating, his hands wrapped around a cup of tea he hadn't touched. My heart sank. Nothing good ever followed those words. "What is it?" He was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "Do you remember Marcus Donovan?" The name sent ice through my veins. Marcus Donovan had been one of Caspian's business associates, a man I'd met at several social functions during our relationship. He'd always made my skin crawl with his cold eyes and predatory smile. "I remember," I said carefully. "He's dead," Caspian stated flatly. "Murdered 3 days ago in a way that was meant to send a message, and the message is directed at me." I set down my fork, suddenly unable to eat. "What kind of message?" Caspian's jaw tightened. "There's a new player moving into New England territory. Someone who's been systematically taking out my associates, disrupting my supply chains, and generally making it clear they want what I have. Marcus was the 3rd casualty in 2 months. You didn't think this was something I should know about?" My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "You promised me that your business wouldn't touch our lives, Caspian, that we'd be safe." "You are safe," he insisted. "I have more security on you than on myself. No one can get near you without going through multiple layers of protection." "That's not the point." I stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "The point is that this is exactly what I was afraid of. Your enemies becoming my enemies. Our son's enemies. This is why I ran." He rose and moved toward me, stopping just close enough that I could feel the heat of his body. "I know. And I'm sorry. But I need you to understand that this isn't unusual. My business has always had elements of risk. What's different now is that I'm being more transparent with you about it." "Transparent," I repeated bitterly. "Is that what you call waiting 3 days to tell me that someone's targeting you and everyone around you?" "I waited because I wanted to have a plan in place before alarming you unnecessarily," he said, And I do have a plan. I turned to face him, my arms crossed protectively over my belly. What plan? I'm moving up my exit strategy, Caspian said, the words clearly difficult for him. I've been working for the past year on legitimizing my businesses, transferring assets into legal enterprises, and distancing myself from the more problematic operations. What I'd planned to do over the next 5 years, I'm accelerating to the next 6 months. I stared at him, unable to process what I was hearing. You're getting out? Of all of it? I'm transitioning, he corrected. Building something that can be handed down to our son without the blood and violence that built it. Real estate development, legitimate import operations, venture capital investments, clean money, legal operations. Hope flared in my chest, dangerous and overwhelming. Why now? Why the sudden change? His hand moved to rest gently on my belly, his expression softening. Because of him. Because I want my son to be proud of his father, not afraid of him. And because you were right, Sloane. The life I've been leading isn't compatible with the family I want to build. I wanted to believe him. God, how desperately I wanted to believe that Caspian could truly walk away from the empire he'd spent years building. But I'd seen too much of that world to think it would let him go easily. People don't just leave your business, I said quietly. You told me once that knowledge is power, and you have knowledge that could destroy a lot of people. They're not going to let you retire peacefully. Which is why I'm being strategic about it, Caspian replied. The transition has to be handled carefully, with the right incentives in place for everyone involved. It will take time and planning, but it's possible. And in the meantime, while you're making this transition, what happens if this new enemy comes for you, comes for us? His expression hardened. Then I deal with it the way I've always dealt with threats, swiftly and permanently. There it was. The reminder that beneath the softer edges he was showing me, Caspian was still capable of violence when he deemed it necessary. He could talk about legitimacy and clean transitions all he wanted, but at his core, he was still a man who solved problems with force. I don't want our son exposed to that, I said firmly. Any of it. Not the threats, not the retaliation, none of it. He won't be, Caspian promised. By the time he's old enough to understand any of this, I'll be nothing more than a businessman with a questionable past. The transition will be complete. I wanted to believe him. But belief required trust, and trust was something I wasn't sure I could give anymore. As if reading my thoughts, Caspian took both of my hands in his grip warm and firm. I know I've given you every reason to doubt me. I know that my promises probably sound empty after everything that's happened. But I'm asking you to have faith in me, Sloane. Not faith in who I've been, but faith in who I'm trying to become. And if you can't change? I asked quietly. If the pull of that life is too strong, or the threats are too persistent, or you realize you can't actually walk away. His eyes met mine, and I saw something vulnerable there that took my breath away. Then you take our son and you run. You disappear so completely that I'll never find you. Because I would rather lose you both than have either of you suffer because of my choices. The words hit me like a physical blow. Caspian Reed, the man who controlled everything and everyone around him, was offering to let me go if he couldn't be what we needed him to be. It was the most profound gift he could give me, and the most terrifying. I don't want to run again, I admitted. These past 6 months have been lonely and frightening, constantly looking over my shoulder, always afraid you'd find me. I don't want that life for our son. Then stay, he said softly. Stay and let me prove that I can be the man you need me to be. The father our son deserves. I looked down at our joined hands, his so much larger than mine, capable of such violence but holding me with such gentleness. Tell me about the night I left. What happened after you realized I was gone?" He was quiet for a long moment, clearly debating how much to share. Finally, he led me back to the sofa, settling beside me with our hands still intertwined. "I came back from Chicago 2 days after you disappeared. I'd been negotiating a deal that required my personal attention, and I couldn't wait. When I got to your apartment and found it mostly empty, I thought someone had taken you." His voice was rough with remembered fear. I had every resource at my disposal, searching for signs of foul play, checking hospitals and morgues, interrogating anyone who might have information. It took 3 days before I found a security camera that showed you leaving voluntarily, alone, in the middle of the night. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I knew you'd worry, but I thought it was better than trying to explain why I was leaving." "You thought wrong," he said flatly. The not knowing was worse than any truth would have been. "I convinced myself you'd left because I'd done something terrible, said something unforgivable. I replayed our last conversation 1,000 times, trying to figure out what I'd missed." Guilt twisted in my chest. I'd been so focused on my own fear and the need to protect my baby that I hadn't fully considered what my disappearance would do to Caspian. I found out I was pregnant and panicked. All I could think about was getting away before you found out, before you could use the baby to keep me tied to you. Is that what you think I would have done? There was hurt in his voice now. Used our child as leverage? I don't know, I admitted. I didn't know you well enough to predict how you'd react. We'd only been together for 4 months, and 3 of those months were spent in this intense, overwhelming bubble where everything moved too fast. Then I found out what you really were, and suddenly I couldn't trust my own judgment anymore. He pulled one hand free to run it through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd seen countless times during our relationship. I should have been more honest with you from the beginning. Should have told you exactly what I was involved in before we got too deep. But I was afraid you'd run, and I'd finally found something precious enough to be worth protecting. So you lied by omission. I said, let me fall in love with a version of you that wasn't complete. Yes, he admitted. And I'm sorry for that. But everything else was real, Sloane. My feelings for you, the way you made me feel human instead of just powerful, the peace I found with you. That was all genuine. I believed him. That was the terrifying part. Despite everything, despite the lies and the danger and the fundamental wrongness of loving a man like Caspian Reed, I believed that his feelings for me were real. What was she like? I asked suddenly. The woman in the photograph in your office, your wife. He went very still, his expression closing off. How do you know about Isabella? I saw the photo once when I was waiting for you in your office. You were married before, weren't you? For a long moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, the sound heavy with old pain. I was married for 3 years. Isabella was the daughter of a business associate, arranged by our families when we were young. She was beautiful, accomplished. Everything a wife in my world should be. What happened to her? She died, he said flatly. Car accident 5 years ago. She was driving home from a charity function when her brakes failed. The investigation ruled it accidental, but I've always suspected otherwise. Ice formed in my stomach. You think someone killed her? I know someone killed her, he corrected. I just never proved who. It was meant to hurt me, to show me that even my wife wasn't safe from my enemies. And they were right. She paid for my choices with her life. The confession hung between us, heavy with implication. Is that why you're so insistent on protecting me? Because you couldn't protect her? Partly, he admitted, but also because you're different. Isabella was born into this world. She understood the risks and accepted them. You didn't choose this, Sloane. You fell in love with a man who deceived you about who he really was. You deserve better than to suffer for my sins. Our son deserves better too, I said softly. I know. His hand found my belly again, that gesture of connection that had become habitual over the past weeks. Which is why I'm going to do everything in my power to build him a different legacy. One that doesn't require looking over his shoulder or wondering if his father's enemies will come for him. We sat in silence for a long while, his hand warm on my belly, feeling our son move beneath his palm. The complexity of what we were attempting, building a family on the ruins of everything I'd feared and fled from, seemed impossible. But as I watched Caspian's face soften with wonder each time the baby kicked, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, love could be enough to bridge the gap between our worlds. There's something else you should know, Caspian said eventually, his tone careful. The reason I'm telling you about the current threat. Tension returned to my shoulders. What? I need to go to Boston for a few days. There are meetings I can't avoid, arrangements that need to be made in person to ensure the transition goes smoothly. I'll be leaving tomorrow. Tomorrow? I couldn't keep the alarm from my voice. How long will you be gone? 3 days, maybe 4. No longer. His hand squeezed mine reassuringly. Your security detail will be doubled while I'm away. I'm also assigning someone specific to you, someone I trust completely. I don't need a babysitter, Caspian. You need protection, he corrected, and so does our son. This isn't negotiable, Sloane. I wanted to argue, to insist on maintaining my independence, but the genuine concern in his eyes stopped me. He was afraid, I realized, truly afraid that something might happen while he was gone. Fine, I conceded, but they stay outside my apartment unless there's an actual emergency. Agreed. He pulled me closer, his arm around my shoulders, and I found myself leaning into his warmth despite my better judgment. I promise I'll be back as soon as I can, and when I return, we'll start making real plans. For the baby, for the future, for everything. Okay, I whispered, allowing myself this moment of weakness, this brief surrender to the comfort of his presence. That night, for the first time since our reunion, Caspian stayed until I fell asleep on the sofa, his hand protectively cradling my belly, and our son moving between us like a bridge across the chasm of everything that remained unresolved. Caspian left for Boston the next morning before sunrise. I woke to find a note on my kitchen counter, written in his precise handwriting. Stay safe. Call if you need anything. I'll be back soon. C. Beside the note was a new phone, sleek and expensive, with a single contact already programmed in. Caspian, emergency. I stared at it for a long moment, before slipping it into my purse alongside my regular phone. The weight of it felt symbolic somehow, another tether binding me to him. My new shadow introduced herself at 7 a.m. sharp. Her knock was professional but not aggressive, and when I opened the door, I found a woman in her early 30s with sharp eyes and an athletic build. She wore casual clothes, jeans, and a fitted jacket, but I could see the slight bulge at her hip that suggested a concealed weapon. Ms. Hartley, I'm Rebecca Torres. Mr. Reed assigned me to your detail while he's away. Her voice was warm, but professional. I'll be maintaining a discreet distance unless you need me, but I wanted to introduce myself so you'd know who to look for. You can call me Sloane, I said, studying her. There was something about her that seemed different from the other security personnel I'd glimpsed over the past weeks. More personable, less intimidating. Can I ask you something? Of course. How long have you worked for Caspian? 6 years, Rebecca replied. He recruited me out of the Secret Service when I was looking for private sector work. And you're okay with what he does? Who he is? She was quiet for a moment, clearly choosing her words carefully. Mr. Reed is a complicated man operating in a complicated world. What I am okay with is that he treats his people well. protects those under his care, and has a code of honor that's rare in any business, legitimate or otherwise. My job is to keep you safe, Ms. Hartley. Sloane. And I take that job seriously. It wasn't exactly an answer, but it was honest enough. I nodded. Thank you for the introduction, Rebecca. I appreciate you not lurking in the shadows. A small smile tugged at her lips. Mr. Reed mentioned you value directness. I'll check in once daily unless something changes. Call if you need anything. After she left, I went through the motions of my morning routine, but my mind was in Boston with Caspian. What meetings was he attending? Who was he negotiating with? Was he safe? Or was the threat he'd mentioned more immediate than he'd let on? My phone, the regular one, buzzed with a text from my coworker Sarah. Coffee before shift? Need to vent about the new attending. I smiled, grateful for the normalcy of workplace drama. Java Junction in 20? The coffee shop was busy with the morning rush, filled with the comforting smells of roasting beans and baking pastries. I found Sarah at our usual corner table, her curly hair pulled back in a messy bun, and her scrubs already wrinkled despite it being barely 8 a.m. You're glowing, she observed as I lowered myself carefully into the chair across from her. Pregnancy looks good on you. Pregnancy looks exhausting on me, I corrected, but I smiled. What's going on with the new attending? For the next 20 minutes, we talked about hospital politics and difficult patients, the comfortable rhythm of collegial complaint that had become one of my few remaining connections to normalcy. Sarah knew I was pregnant, knew I was single, but I'd kept the details vague. The father's not in the picture had been enough to satisfy her curiosity without inviting deeper questions. So, she said as we were finishing our coffee, I know you're being mysterious about the baby's father, and that's totally your right, but I have to ask, is everything okay? You seem tense lately. I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. He's back in my life. It's complicated. Complicated bad or complicated good? Both, I admitted. He wants to be involved with the baby, which is good, but he comes with a lot of baggage, which is definitely not good. Sarah reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Just remember that you don't owe him anything just because he's the biological father. Your baby's well-being comes first, and if this guy's baggage is going to harm either of you, you have every right to protect yourself. I know, I said quietly. That's what I've been trying to do. We parted ways outside the coffee shop, and I was walking toward my car when Rebecca appeared at my elbow, her expression tense. We need to go, she said quietly. Now. My heart jumped into my throat. What's wrong? A vehicle's been circling the block for the past 10 minutes. Same one that was parked outside your apartment building this morning. Could be nothing, but Mr. Reed's instructions are clear. Any potential threat gets treated as real until proven otherwise. She guided me quickly to a black SUV idling at the curb, not the one Caspian's men usually drove. Once inside, she pulled into traffic with practiced ease, her eyes constantly checking the mirrors. Are we being followed? I asked, my hand instinctively moving to protect my belly. Not anymore, Rebecca replied. But I'm not taking chances. We're going to a safe location until I can verify the threat level. The safe location turned out to be a nondescript apartment building in a quiet residential neighborhood. Rebecca led me to a second-floor unit that was furnished but impersonal, clearly maintained as an emergency backup. Mr. Reed has several of these throughout the city, Rebecca explained as she did a sweep of the rooms. Standard procedure when there's a potential security concern. This is insane, I muttered, sinking onto the sofa. I was just getting coffee with a coworker. And now you're safe, Rebecca countered. That's what matters. She pulled out her phone. I need to update Mr. Reed. He'll want to know about this. Please don't, I said quickly. He's in Boston dealing with important things. There's no reason to worry him over what might be nothing. Rebecca gave me a look that suggested she thought I was being naive. Ms. Hartley, you and that baby are the most important things in Mr. Reed's world right now. If there's a potential threat to either of you, he absolutely wants to know about it. She was right, of course, but part of me resented the loss of agency, the way every decision about my safety was being made by other people. I'd spent 6 months maintaining my own security, making my own choices, and now I was being shuffled from safe house to safe house like a chess piece. Rebecca's conversation with Caspian was brief, but intense. I could hear his voice through the phone, sharp with concern, though I couldn't make out the words. When she hung up, her expression was apologetic. He's coming back early. Should be here by this evening. Rebecca, that's not necessary. You said yourself it might be nothing. It might be, she agreed. But Mr. Reed doesn't take chances where you're concerned. And honestly, Ms. Hartley, neither should you. You're 7 months pregnant with the child of a very powerful man who has enemies. That makes you a target whether you like it or not. The blunt assessment sent a chill through me. I'd been trying so hard to maintain some illusion of normalcy, to believe that Caspian's world could be kept separate from mine. But the truth was undeniable. The moment I'd become pregnant with his child, I'd become part of his world whether I wanted to be or not. How long do I have to stay here? I asked quietly. Until Mr. Reed arrives, and we've verified the situation. A few hours at most. Those few hours stretched endlessly. I tried to read, to watch television, to do anything that would distract me from the growing anxiety. Rebecca remained professional, but not unkind, bringing me water and a sandwich from a nearby deli, checking in periodically to make sure I was comfortable. It was just after 6 when I heard the key in the lock. Caspian entered like a storm, his suit jacket gone, and his shirt sleeves rolled up, his hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. His eyes found me immediately, and I saw the relief wash over his face. "You're all right," he said, crossing to me in 3 long strides. His hands framed my face, tilting it up so he could study me intently. "Both of you?" "We're fine," I assured him. Rebecca probably overreacted. Rebecca did her job, Caspian corrected, shooting an approving glance at his security chief. "What do we know?" "The vehicle was registered to a shell company that traces back to the Volkov organization," Rebecca reported. "They've been expanding their operations in Providence over the past month. This could be reconnaissance, or it could be a message." Caspian's jaw tightened. "The Volkovs. That's the new player I mentioned. Russian Mafia moving into New England territory. Why would they be interested in me?" I asked, fear making my voice sharp. "Because they're interested in me," Caspian replied grimly. "And they've done their homework. They know that you disappeared 6 months ago, and they know you've recently resurfaced. They're probably still trying to determine what you mean to me, whether you're a weakness they can exploit." "This is exactly what I was afraid of," I said, standing abruptly despite the hand he put out to steady me. "Your enemies becoming my enemies. Our son becoming a target before he's even born." "I know," Caspian said quietly. "Which is why we're not staying in Providence." I stared at him. "What?" "You're coming back to Boston with me. Tonight. I have a property there that's significantly more secure than anything here, and I can better coordinate your protection when you're not 2 hours away." "No," I said flatly. "We had an agreement. I stay in Providence, maintain my life here." "The situation has changed," Caspian said, his voice hardening. "The Volkovs are more aggressive than I anticipated. You're not safe here." "I'm not safe anywhere," I countered. "That's the reality of being involved with you, isn't it? There will always be threats, always be enemies. Moving to Boston doesn't change that." "It gives me better control over the situation," he insisted. "More resources, more personnel, better intelligence networks. More control over me, you mean?" I crossed my arms, ignoring the way the gesture pushed my belly out further. "This is what I was afraid of, Caspian. You using the danger as an excuse to trap me, to force me back into your life on your terms." His expression flickered with hurt, before hardening into something colder. "I'm trying to protect you and our son. If you can't see that, if you're going to fight me on every reasonable security measure—" "Reasonable?" My voice rose. "Uprooting my entire life because someone might have been watching me isn't reasonable, it's paranoid. It's reality." He matched my volume, his control finally cracking. "This is the world I live in, Sloane. The world our son will be born into. I'm sorry if that's not what you wanted, but it's what we have. And I will do whatever is necessary to keep both of you safe, even if you hate me for it." The raw emotion in his voice stopped me cold. He wasn't just being controlling, I realized. He was genuinely terrified. Terrified of losing me the way he'd lost Isabella. Terrified of failing to protect his child. Terrified that his choices and his past would destroy everything he'd found worth caring about. "I don't hate you," I said quietly, my anger deflating. "I'm just scared, Caspian. Scared of losing myself completely, of becoming nothing more than an extension of your world." He closed the distance between us, his hands gentle on my shoulders. "You could never be just an extension of anything. You're brilliant and strong and stubborn as hell." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "And you're the mother of my son, which makes you more precious to me than anything else in this world." "Pretty words," I said, but without heat. "How do they translate to action?" "Come to Boston," he said. "Not as a prisoner or a possession, but as my partner. Help me build the legitimate empire I'm trying to create. Use your skills and intelligence to shape something better. And if after the baby's born, you decide you want to return to Providence, I won't stop you." I wanted to believe him. But experience had taught me that Caspian's promises came with asterisks and conditions that only revealed themselves later. "I need time to think," I said finally. "We don't have time," he replied. "The Volkovs know where you live, where you work. Every hour you spend here is an hour they could be planning something. Please, Sloane, trust me on this." Trust. It always came back to trust. And the terrible truth was that despite everything, despite the lies and the danger and the fundamental impossibility of our situation, I did trust him. Not completely, not blindly, but enough to believe that his desire to protect me and our son was genuine. "One condition," I said. "I want to keep working. Maybe not at the clinic, but somewhere. I won't be locked away in some gilded cage with nothing to do but wait for the baby to be born." "Agreed," Caspian said without hesitation. "There's a community health center in Roxbury that could use an experienced nurse. It's in a neighborhood I have significant influence in, which means security will be easier to maintain. And after the baby's born, we reassess, together, as partners." I studied his face, trying to read the truth beneath his controlled expression. Finally, I nodded. "Okay, I'll come to Boston. But if this turns into what I'm afraid it will, if I feel like I'm losing myself, I'm gone. And next time, Caspian, you won't find me." Something dangerous flashed in his eyes, but he nodded. "Fair enough." Rebecca cleared her throat delicately. "I'll coordinate the move. We should leave within the hour before it gets too late." The next 60 minutes passed in a blur of activity. Rebecca and another security team member went to my apartment to pack essentials, while Caspian made phone calls arranging everything on the Boston end. I sat on the safe house sofa, my hand on my belly, feeling our son's movements and wondering what I'd just agreed to. "Are you all right?" Caspian asked, ending his call and sitting beside me. His hand covered mine on my belly, that gesture of connection that had become habitual between us. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm terrified and resigned and hopeful all at once. Is that normal?" I think that's the most honest thing you've ever said to me. His thumb stroked soothingly over my knuckles. I'm terrified too, Sloane. Terrified of failing you and failing him. But I'm also determined to be better than my past, to build something we can both be proud of. Just promise me one thing, I said quietly. Anything. Don't make me regret trusting you. His hand tightened on mine. I promise I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of that trust. It wasn't a guarantee. Nothing with Caspian ever was. But as we drove through the night toward Boston, toward the life I'd fled 6 months ago, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to make this impossible situation work. For our son's sake, if nothing else. The Boston property Caspian brought me to was not his main residence, the penthouse in Seaport that I remembered from our relationship. Instead, it was a renovated brownstone in Beacon Hill. Elegant but understated, with a tree-lined street and neighbors who valued privacy as much as security. He'd bought it, he explained, specifically as a sanctuary. A place separate from his business where family could be insulated from the darker aspects of his world. The interior was beautiful, all hardwood floors and original moldings, but clearly recently updated with modern amenities. 3 bedrooms upstairs, one of which had already been converted into a nursery that made my chest tighten. He'd duplicated everything we'd bought for my Providence apartment, but added more. A changing table, a rocking chair positioned near the window, soft lighting, and blackout curtains. Every detail considered, every need anticipated. When did you do this? I asked, standing in the doorway of the nursery, overwhelmed by the reality of it. I started the renovations a month ago, Caspian admitted, coming to stand beside me. After I found you, but before I approached you, I wanted to be ready in case you agreed to come back. You were very confident I would. No, he corrected quietly. I was hopeful. There's a difference. I moved into the room, running my fingers over the soft blankets in the crib, the mobile of stars and moons suspended above it. It's perfect. You sound sad about that. I am, a little, I admitted. Because it's one more thing tying me to you. One more piece of this life you're building that I want, despite knowing I shouldn't. His arms came around me from behind, his hands settling over mine on my belly. Why shouldn't you want it? Stability, security, a beautiful home for our son. These aren't bad things, Sloane. They're not the problem, I said. The problem is what comes with them. The violence, the enemies, the constant fear. I'm working on changing that, he reminded me. The transition is happening. Slowly, but it's happening. I leaned back against his chest, allowing myself this moment of weakness. Tell me about it. The transition. The specifics. He was quiet for a moment, clearly deciding how much to reveal. I've been selling off the more problematic operations. The drug distribution networks are being handed to associates who can maintain them without my direct involvement. The weapons imports are being phased out entirely. The protection rackets are being restructured as legitimate security consulting services. And the people who've worked for you? Do they just accept these changes? Some do. Others need convincing. His voice hardened slightly. That's what the meetings in Boston were about. Making sure everyone understands that this isn't optional, it's happening. And that there will be consequences for anyone who tries to interfere with the transition. What kind of consequences? The kind you don't want to know about, he replied. Trust me, Sloane. Some things are better left unexamined. But I was tired of not examining things, of willful ignorance and convenient blindness. No. If I'm going to be part of this, if I'm going to raise our son in your world, I need to understand all of it. Not just the sanitized version you think I can handle. He sighed, his breath warm against my hair. All right. The consequences range from financial penalties for minor infractions to permanent removal for serious threats to the transition. I have a reputation for being fair, but absolute. When I give an order, it's followed. When I make a promise, it's kept. And when I say someone has crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. He trailed off, leaving the implication hanging. You kill them, I finished flatly. Sometimes. More often, I make them wish I had. There are fates worse than death, Sloane, and I've perfected several of them over the years. The casual way he discussed such violence should have horrified me. Instead, I felt a strange numbness. This was who Caspian was. The reality beneath the tender touches and protective gestures. He was capable of terrible things when he deemed them necessary. Does it bother you? I asked. The things you've done? He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Yes, he finally said. And no. I've never hurt anyone who didn't pose a threat to me or mine. Never killed anyone who wasn't themselves a killer. But that doesn't make it right. Only necessary. The world I operate in has different rules, and I've played by those rules to survive and thrive. And our son? What rules will he learn? Different ones, Caspian promised. By the time he's old enough to understand any of this, I'll be nothing more than a businessman with a complicated past. The violence will be history, not present reality. I wanted to believe him. Desperately wanted to believe that Caspian could truly transform from who he'd been into, who he claimed he wanted to become. But the doubt lingered, a constant undercurrent beneath every promise. The first few days in Boston passed in a strange bubble of domesticity. Caspian worked from home, taking calls and meetings in his study while I nested in the brownstone, arranging baby clothes and reading pregnancy books. Rebecca remained my constant shadow, though she was adept at giving me space while maintaining her protective vigil. It was on the fourth day that everything shifted again. I woke at 3 a.m. to voices downstairs, tense and urgent. Caspian's side of the bed was empty, the sheets cold. I pulled on a robe and padded to the top of the stairs, listening. Confirmed it was the Volkovs, a male voice I recognized as belonging to Marcus, one of Caspian's senior lieutenants. They hit the warehouse in Charlestown, took everything, left 2 of our men dead. Son of a bitch. Caspian's voice was cold with fury. I warned Volkov what would happen if he pushed too hard. He's not taking you seriously, boss. Thinks you're going soft, distracted by the woman and the baby. He's testing you, seeing if you'll retaliate or back down. Then I need to remind him why crossing me is a mistake, Caspian said, his voice dropping to that deadly calm that was somehow more frightening than rage. Gather the core team. We move tonight. My hand flew to my mouth, stifling a gasp. He was planning something violent, something that would escalate this conflict rather than contain it. And I was living under his roof, carrying his child, while he orchestrated whatever retaliation he had in mind. I must have made some sound because suddenly Caspian was at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at me with an expression that was equal parts guilty and determined. You should be resting, he said, already moving up the stairs toward me. I heard, I said quietly. What are you planning? He took my arm gently, guiding me back to the bedroom and closing the door behind us. Nothing you need to worry about. Don't do that, I said sharply. Don't patronize me. You're planning something violent, something that could get you killed. I have a right to know. His jaw tightened. The Volkovs killed 2 of my men and destroyed a warehouse full of legitimate inventory. That can't go unanswered. If I let it stand, others will see it as weakness and test me further. The transition requires strength, Sloane. Sometimes that strength has to be demonstrated. And if something goes wrong, if you're killed or arrested, what happens to me and the baby then? That won't happen, he said, but I heard the slight uncertainty beneath his confidence. You can't know that. I moved closer, my hand finding his chest, feeling his heart beating steady and strong beneath my palm. Please don't do this. Not now, not when we're so close to having something real. His hand covered mine, his eyes conflicted. I have to. If I back down, if I show weakness, everything I've built will crumble. And then we'll be in real danger. Not just from the Volkovs, but from everyone who thinks they can take what's mine. I'm not yours to take, I reminded him. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. No, but you're mine to protect, and I will do that, whatever it takes. He kissed my forehead, a gesture of affection and farewell, then left. I stood at the bedroom window, watching as he and 4 other men climbed into 2 black SUVs and disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness. Rebecca appeared at my door moments later. He asked me to stay with you, she said quietly, to make sure you're safe while he's handling business. Do you know what he's planning? I asked, not taking my eyes from the empty street. I have an idea, Rebecca admitted. And for what it's worth, it's necessary. The Volkovs went too far. Will he be okay? She was quiet for a moment. Mr. Reed is very good at what he does. He survived situations that would have killed most men, but there are no guarantees in his business. All we can do is wait and hope. The waiting was torture. I tried to sleep but couldn't. Tried to read but the words blurred on the page. Rebecca made me tea and sat with me, offering silent companionship without pushing conversation. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt the baby kick hard against my ribs. A reminder of what was at stake, what I stood to lose if Caspian didn't come back. It was just after 7 when I heard the door open. I rushed to the top of the stairs, relief flooding through me as Caspian appeared. He was disheveled, his shirt stained with what might have been blood, his face bearing a fresh bruise along his jaw. But he was alive, whole. Go, he said quietly to Rebecca, who nodded and slipped out. Then his eyes found mine, and I saw the weight of whatever he'd done in their depths. I descended the stairs slowly, my hand on the railing for balance. When I reached him, I touched his face gently, feeling the swelling beneath my fingers. Are you hurt? I asked. Nothing serious, he replied, but I could see the lie in the tightness around his eyes. What did you do? He was quiet for a long moment. What I had to. The Volkovs won't be a problem anymore. I didn't ask for details. Didn't want to know exactly what that meant. Instead, I took his hand and led him upstairs, to the bathroom where I ran warm water and cleaned the blood from his knuckles with gentle efficiency, my nursing training taking over. He watched me silently, something vulnerable in his expression. You should hate me, he said quietly, for being what I am, for doing what I do. I probably should, I agreed, dabbing antiseptic on a split knuckle. But apparently I'm not that smart. Or you're smarter than either of us realize, he suggested, smart enough to see beyond the violence to what I'm trying to become. Or I'm just a fool in love with a dangerous man, I countered. The jury's still out. His hand caught mine, stilling my ministrations. Say that again. That I'm a fool? The other part. I met his eyes, seeing the hope and need there. I love you, I admitted quietly. I've loved you since you first walked into that ER with a bullet wound and didn't flinch. I loved you when I found out what you were. And I loved you when I ran. And I love you now. God help me, Caspian. But I love you. He pulled me to him, as close as my belly would allow, his forehead resting against mine. I love you too, he breathed. More than I've ever loved anything. You and our son. You're everything that matters. We stood like that for a long moment. 2 broken people trying to build something whole from the wreckage of our choices. Then he kissed me. slow and deep, tasting of coffee and copper and desperation. That night, as we lay in bed with his hand on my belly and our son moving between us, I allowed myself to believe that maybe we really could make this work. That love could be enough to bridge the gap between our worlds, to build something lasting from such impossible foundations. I was wrong, of course. But in that moment, wrapped in Caspian's arms with our son's kicks reminding us both of what we were fighting for, hope felt like enough. 2 weeks passed in relative peace. Caspian's retaliation against the Volkovs had apparently sent the message he'd intended. The threats receded, the surveillance disappeared, and life settled into something almost normal. I started working part-time at the Roxbury Health Center, finding satisfaction in returning to nursing even in a limited capacity. Caspian continued his transition, meeting with lawyers and accountants more than with the hardened men who'd once been his primary associates. We fell into a rhythm that felt dangerously like happiness. Morning coffee together before he disappeared into his study to work. Evenings spent discussing baby names and nursery colors. Weekends exploring Boston's quieter neighborhoods. Caspian pointing out properties he owned or was considering purchasing. Rebecca remained my constant shadow, but she was personable enough that her presence became familiar rather than oppressive. I was 32 weeks pregnant when everything fell apart again. It started with a phone call that woke us at 2 a.m. Caspian answered, his voice immediately sharp and alert. When? A pause. How many? Another pause, longer this time. I'm on my way. He was out of bed before I could fully wake, pulling on clothes with efficient speed. What's wrong? I asked, sitting up with difficulty, my belly making every movement awkward. There's been an incident, he said, his voice tight. I need to handle it. What kind of incident? He hesitated, clearly debating how much to tell me. Someone breached one of my warehouses, the one where I've been storing documentation for the transition. Financial records, contracts, all the proof that I'm dismantling the illegal operations. Ice flooded my veins. The transition evidence? Caspian? If someone gets that? They can expose everything, he finished grimly. Which would mean federal charges, prison time, and the complete destruction of everything I've been building. I know. So, what are you going to do? Get it back, he said simply, before it can be used against me. He kissed me quickly, a brush of lips that felt too much like goodbye, then left. I heard the SUV pull away, then silence. Rebecca appeared at my door moments later. He asked me to stay with you, she said. It was becoming a familiar refrain. I hate this, I admitted. The constant fear, the middle-of-the-night emergencies. This isn't what I want for our son, Rebecca. I know, she said gently. But it won't last forever. Once the transition is complete. If it's completed, I interrupted. If he survives long enough to finish it. If his enemies don't destroy him first. If. I'm so tired of living in conditionals. She sat beside me on the bed, her professional demeanor softening. Mr. Reed loves you and that baby more than anything in his life. He's risking everything to build something legitimate, something you can be proud of. That has to count for something. It counts for a lot, I admitted. It just might not be enough. The hours crawled by. Dawn came and went. My shift at the health center started, and I had to call in sick, unable to leave without knowing if Caspian was safe. Rebecca made me breakfast, tried to distract me with baby talk and hospital gossip, but nothing could ease the knot of anxiety in my chest. It was nearly noon when Caspian finally returned. He looked worse than I'd ever seen him. Exhausted, blood on his collar, a haunted expression in his eyes. Marcus was with him, and another man I didn't recognize, both looking equally grim. What happened? I demanded, moving to Caspian as quickly as my pregnant body would allow. He pulled me close, his embrace almost desperate. We got the documents back. Most of them, anyway. Most? His jaw tightened. Some were already copied, sent to parties unknown. We're trying to trace where they went, but... He trailed off, the implication clear. Someone has leverage against you. I finished quietly. Yes. He pulled back to look at me, his hands framing my face. Which means the timeline for the transition just accelerated dramatically. I need to complete the legitimization process immediately, before whoever has those documents decides to use them. How long will that take? Weeks, maybe a month if I push hard. But it's going to require me to be absent more, to travel, to take risks I'd rather avoid. Then don't do it, I said. Walk away now. Leave everything behind and just be with me and the baby. He smiled sadly. You know I can't do that. If I walk away without completing the transition, those documents will destroy me anyway. Prison time, asset seizure, constant danger from people who think I betrayed them. This is the only path forward that gives us any chance at a normal life. I wanted to argue, to insist that there had to be another way. But I could see in his eyes that he'd already considered every option, already chosen the path he deemed necessary. Then do what you have to do, I said quietly. But Caspian, if something happens to you... It won't, he interrupted. I promise, Sloane. I will survive this, and we will have the life I've been working toward. Trust me. That word again. Trust. The foundation of everything between us, and yet still so fragile. The next 3 weeks were the longest of my life. Caspian was gone more than he was home, constantly traveling between Boston, New York, and various other cities where his business interests required attention. When he was home, he was distracted, taking calls at all hours, the stress visible in the lines around his eyes and the tension in his shoulders. I was 35 weeks pregnant when the final crisis hit. It started with contractions, uncomfortable but not painful, during my shift at the health center. I mentioned them to Rebecca, who immediately called Caspian. He was in New York, wouldn't be back until evening. Dr. Morrison, my obstetrician, told me to come in to be monitored, that it was probably just Braxton Hicks, but better to be safe. The monitoring showed the contractions were regular, but not progressing. Probably preterm labor starting, Dr. Morrison said. We'll keep you overnight for observation. If they don't stop, we might need to deliver early. Rebecca stayed with me, keeping up a stream of calm conversation while I tried not to panic. Our son was healthy but not full term yet. If he came now, he'd likely be fine, but 5 more weeks would be better. I needed Caspian here, needed his steady presence and reassuring touch. He arrived just after midnight, bursting into my hospital room with wild eyes and disheveled appearance. Is he okay? Are you okay? We're fine, I assured him, reaching for his hand. Contractions have slowed. Dr. Morrison thinks they'll stop completely with rest. Relief washed over his face, and he sank into the chair beside my bed, our hands tightly clasped. I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner. The meeting ran long, and then there was an issue with one of the transfers. It's okay, I interrupted. You're here now. He raised my hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to my knuckles. I'm almost done, Sloane. 2 more major transactions, and the transition is complete. 2 weeks, maybe 3 at most. And then I'm yours completely. No more midnight emergencies. No more dangerous meetings. Just you, me, and our son. I wanted to believe him, but I'd learned that Caspian's world didn't let go easily. The proof came 2 days later, when I'd been sent home on bed rest. I was resting in the bedroom when I heard raised voices downstairs. Caspian and Marcus, arguing about something. I couldn't make out the words, but the tension was clear. Then a gunshot shattered the afternoon quiet. My scream was involuntary, terror flooding through me. Rebecca was beside me in seconds, her gun drawn, positioning herself between me and the door. "Stay here," she ordered, her professional mask firmly in place. "Don't move." But I couldn't stay. That was Caspian down there, possibly hurt or dead. I pushed past Rebecca, moving as quickly as my pregnant body would allow, down the stairs toward the study where the voices had been coming from. The scene that greeted me would haunt my nightmares for years. Marcus lay on the floor, blood pooling beneath him from a chest wound. Caspian stood over him, gun still in hand, his face a mask of cold fury. Another man, someone I'd never seen before, was pressed against the wall by two of Caspian's security team. "What happened?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Caspian's head snapped toward me, and I saw the moment he registered my presence, saw the mix of anger and regret flash across his face. "Sloan, you shouldn't be here." "What did you do?" I moved closer despite Rebecca's attempt to stop me. "Did you shoot Marcus?" "He was working with the Volkovs," Caspian said flatly, feeding them information, planning to sabotage the transition. He pulled a gun when I confronted him. I looked at Marcus, at the man I'd seen dozens of times over the past months, who'd always been respectful and professional. "Is he dead?" "Not yet," Caspian replied. "But he will be." The casualness with which he said it sent ice through my veins. This was the man I'd fallen in love with, the father of my child, calmly discussing killing someone who'd betrayed him. The violence I'd tried so hard to ignore was now literally at my feet, impossible to deny. "You can't," I whispered. "Caspian, you can't just kill him." His expression hardened. "He betrayed me. Endangered everything I've been working for, including your safety and our sons. There are consequences for that. Please." I moved closer, my hand finding his arm. "Don't do this. Not here. Not now. Call the police. Let them handle it." "The police can't handle this," he said. "This is my world, Sloan. My rules. And the rule is simple. Betray me, and you die." "Then your world is wrong," I said, tears streaming down my face. "And I can't be part of it anymore." Something cracked in his expression, a flash of real pain beneath the cold control. "Sloan." "I mean it," I interrupted. "If you kill him, if you choose that violence over the chance at something better, I'm done. I'll take our son and disappear so completely you'll never find us. And this time, Caspian, I'll make sure there's no trail to follow." We stared at each other across the study, across the body bleeding on the floor, across the chasm of everything we'd tried to build together. The choice was clear: his old life, or the new one we'd been reaching for. Caspian was silent for a long moment. Then he lowered the gun. "Get him to a hospital," he ordered his men. "Make sure he survives, but make it clear that if he ever crosses me again, there won't be a second chance." Relief weakened my knees. Rebecca caught me as I swayed, steadying me with a firm grip. "Call 911, Caspian continued. "Tell them there was an accidental discharge. Marcus will cooperate with that story if he wants to live." He looked at me, his eyes holding mine. "Does that satisfy you?" I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Within minutes, the study was cleared. Paramedics arrived and took Marcus away. The police asked cursory questions, clearly intimidated by Caspian's presence and satisfied with the accidental discharge story. By the time everyone left, it was evening, and I was exhausted beyond measure. Caspian found me in the nursery, sitting in the rocking chair with my hands on my belly, feeling our son's movements and trying to process everything that had happened. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said quietly from the doorway. "I'm sorry it happened at all," I replied. "This is what I've been afraid of, Caspian. The violence that follows you, that touches everything around you." He moved into the room, kneeling beside the rocking chair. I know, and I'm trying to change. You saw that today, didn't you? I chose differently because of you. You chose not to kill someone in front of me, I corrected. That's not the same as choosing peace. It's a start, he insisted. Every choice I make now is building toward something better. For you, for our son. You have to believe that. I looked down at him, at this powerful, dangerous man kneeling at my feet, asking for my faith. I want to believe it. But I'm so tired, Caspian. Tired of being afraid. Tired of the constant crises. Tired of never knowing if you'll come home at night. Then let me give you certainty, he said, taking my hands. The transition is almost complete. 2 weeks, maybe less. Once it's done, I swear to you, everything changes. No more violence, no more midnight emergencies. Just us, our family, the life we both want. And if it's not done in 2 weeks, if there are more complications, more betrayals, more reasons why you need just a little more time. His grip tightened on my hands. Then I walk away anyway. I'll leave everything unfinished if that's what it takes to keep you. I choose you, Sloane. You and our son, over everything else. I studied his face, trying to read the truth in his eyes. Do you mean that? Really mean it? On everything I am and everything I hope to become. He replied, You're my family now. Nothing matters more than that. I believed him. Maybe I was a fool. Maybe I was setting myself up for more heartbreak. But in that moment, I believed that Caspian Reed, dangerous criminal and aspiring legitimate businessman, genuinely meant every word. Okay, I whispered. 2 weeks, and then, one way or another, this ends. He nodded, relief washing over his face. 2 weeks. He was right, though not in the way either of us anticipated. Exactly 12 days later, I went into labor for real. The contractions started in the middle of the afternoon, strong and regular. Caspian was home, thank God. Finishing up what he said were the final documents of his transition. Dr. Morrison met us at the hospital, her calm professionalism a steadying force as the labor progressed. Caspian stayed with me through every contraction, his hand in mine, his voice in my ear offering encouragement and love. When our son finally emerged at 8:47 p.m., screaming his arrival with robust fury, I watched Caspian's face transform into something I'd never seen before. Pure, unblemished joy. He's perfect, Caspian breathed, tears streaming down his face as the nurse placed our son in his arms. Sloane, he's absolutely perfect. I couldn't speak past the emotion clogging my throat. Our son, 7 pounds and 5 ounces of squirming, crying humanity, was finally here. The reason for everything. The hope that had sustained us through impossible odds. What's his name? The nurse asked gently. Caspian looked at me, the question in his eyes. We'd discussed names for weeks without coming to a final decision. James, I said, the name coming to me with sudden certainty. James Reed Hartley, after my father. Caspian's expression softened. James Reed Hartley. It's perfect. Those first hours with our son were a bubble of peace that I wished could last forever. Caspian held James with surprising confidence for a first-time father, studying every tiny feature as if memorizing his son's face. When the baby finally nursed, falling into sated sleep, I watched Caspian watch him and felt something settle in my chest. We were a family now. Whatever came next, we would face it together. The proof of Caspian's transition came 3 days later, when we were preparing to bring James home from the hospital. He received a call, stepped out into the hallway to take it, then returned with an expression I'd never seen before. What is it? I asked, adjusting James in my arms. That was my attorney, he said, his voice strange. The final transfer went through. All the illegal operations are officially divested. Everything I own now is legitimate, clean, legal. It's done, Sloan. The transition is complete. I stared at him, hardly daring to believe. It's really over? All of it? All of it, he confirmed. I'm just a businessman now. Wealthy, well-connected, but operating entirely within the law. My past is still there, but it's buried deep enough that it won't touch our family. The relief was so intense it felt physical. So we're safe? James is safe? As safe as I can make you, Caspian replied, moving to sit beside me on the hospital bed, which is very safe indeed. We brought James home to the Beacon Hill brownstone later that day. Rebecca had transformed the house, adding balloons and a welcome banner that seemed incongruous with her usually professional demeanor. She held James with surprising tenderness, cooing at him in Spanish. That night, with our son sleeping in his bassinet beside our bed and Caspian's arm around my shoulders, I finally let myself believe that we might actually have made it through. That love had been enough to transform a criminal into a father, danger into security, fear into hope. Thank you, Caspian whispered into the darkness. For what? For not giving up on me. For running when you needed to and staying when I needed you. For giving me James. For giving me a reason to become someone better. I turned to face him, seeing the man I loved outlined in the soft glow from the nursery nightlight. Thank you for fighting to be worth staying for. He kissed me then, slow and sweet, a promise of tomorrow and all the days after. When we finally settled into sleep, our son's soft breathing the only sound, I felt a peace I hadn't known in over a year. The life we'd built from impossible odds was real. Our family was safe. And Caspian Reed, former criminal mastermind, was just a father holding his son's hand through the dark, promising silently to always keep him safe. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.